Hello students, this movie is going to be about intelligence and language. The concept of intelligence has been difficult for psychologists to define. However, most agree that it is the mental ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new situations. There are several theories of intelligence put forth by psychologists. I'm going to cover the theory proposed by Charles Spearman as well as the one proposed by L.L. Thurston. British psychologist Charles Spearman described a concept he referred to as general intelligence, also known as the G factor. After using a technique known as factor analysis to examine a number of mental abilities, Spearman concluded that scores on these tests were remarkably similar, such that people who performed well on one cognitive test also performed on a variety of other cognitive tests, and those who performed poorly on one test would also score poorly on a multitude of other exams. So therefore, he concluded that intelligence comes down to a single unit that can be measured and quantified numerically, and he dubbed this the G factor. After Spearman developed his theory, came along L.L. Thurston, who challenged the concept of a single unitary G factor to explain intelligence. L.L. Thurston contributed to many areas of psychology, including psychometrics and statistics, and his statistical contribution really laid the foundation for his ability to do two-factor analysis to assess his belief that intelligence came from a variety of areas, not just this G factor, which he thought was a statistical artifact found in Spearman's theories. Thurston, with his new two-factor approach to analysis, was able to determine that intelligence did not in fact arise from a single numerical factor, known as the G factor. He in fact found that intelligence arose from 7 different primary abilities, and those included word fluency, language comprehension, spatial visualization, number faculty, procedural speed, as well as associative memory and reasoning. Importantly, Thurston applied his model to a population of people that had very similar scores on a general IQ test. So taking a population of people that should be about the same overall on a different variety of IQ tests if the G factor model is true. However, what he found was that all of these people had different levels of intelligence along these primary abilities. This gave him support for his model over Spearman's and suggested that the Thurston model was more clinically relevant than the Spearman model. However, in a follow-up experiment, when he assessed intelligence in a group of people that had a variety of scores on a general IQ test, he found that there was a lot of overlap between the primary abilities. So he didn't get this quite distinct pattern of intelligence that he wanted on all these 7 different variables. But he was able to come up with a mathematically elegant model to explain both a G factor of intelligence that was inherently there to explain general intelligence, but also to explain these 7 different primary abilities of intelligence. For the purpose of this video and for your quiz tomorrow, just know that Charles Spearman developed the theory of intelligence, proposing that intelligence was based on a single factor, known as the G factor. And L.L. Thurston developed a theory of intelligence that was based on the 7 different primary abilities. All right, so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about language, the areas of the brain that are responsible for language production as well as language comprehension. And if we have damage to these areas of the brain, what can we expect from those individuals in their ability to both comprehend and produce language? So I'm going to draw the brain here. And we have a gyri right here. And we have our motor cortex strip up here, motor area. And we have our auditory cortex here. So this part is our ability to move, and this part is our ability to hear. As you can imagine, they both play different roles in our ability to produce or understand language. The motor area is really critical in our ability to move our mouths, move our tongues, to be able to produce speech. The auditory area of our brain is really necessary in order to be able to understand and comprehend what's being said. So of course, our language areas, which are on the left hemisphere, known as Broca's area and Wernicke's area, are associated with these different regions of the brain. And because of this, these two distinct language areas have two distinct roles. The Broca's area is near the motor cortex, and the Wernicke's area is near the auditory cortex. Because of this, when you damage Broca's area, you have an inability to produce speech. So if someone suffers from a traumatic brain injury that specifically damaged Broca's area, because it is near the motor cortex strip, they're going to have the difficult ability in being able to move their mouth, move their tongue in the way that they always learned how to. They're no longer going to be able to produce the speech because they can't move their mouths and tongues like they used to. Whereas if you have damage to the Wernicke's area, you're going to have difficulty with language comprehension. You'll be able to speak, you'll be able to produce speech, but it's going to be in the form of what is known as a word salad. It's not going to be distinguishable speech. It's not going to be relevant to what's being said because they're not able to comprehend things because the auditory speech loop has become damaged because Wernicke's is right next to that auditory area. This is why when people have a traumatic brain injury that damages Wernicke's, they're going to be able to produce speech, but it's not going to be the speech that they mean to produce or a speech that's relevant to the situation. All right, so now I'm going to talk to you about a couple theories of language acquisition, specifically that we learn language by repeating what is heard around us through learning mechanisms or by generativity, by seeing language in a general way and adapting it to our own purposes and coming up with independent phrases and sentences. Perhaps the most straightforward theory of language development is that it occurs via learning, through association, reinforcement, and the observation of others. This was proposed by Skinner in 1965. Skinner was a developmenter. He developed the model of operant conditioning, operant learning. There must be some truth to that model because language is definitely learned in part. I mean, when we are young, we develop the language that we are raised within. We don't generate a language that is not within our environment. However, language cannot be entirely learned because obviously children learn words much faster than they can be learned through reinforcement. In between the ages of 18 months to 5 years, children are learning up to 10 new words every day. More importantly, language is more generative than it is imitative. Generativity refers to the fact that speakers of language compose sentences that represent new ideas. So they're formulating language that they have never heard before. A language is not a preset set of sentences that we're just selecting from, but rather it is a set of rules that we can make completely new language from. Rather, we can convey new ideas from the set of rules that we are establishing. For example, when a child says, I run down the street, that is an example of generativity. They are generating that new language that an adult who knows English very well would never say. We would say, I ran down the street. But a child who is experimenting with these rules and still figuring them out would generate their own language to describe what they did. Because of this, generativity is seen as the more dominant way that we learn language over theories of learning for language, but they're definitely a combined way that we acquire language over a lifetime. All right, students, so you guys have a quiz on intelligence and language on Thursday, the 30th, day before Halloween. Please study hard on intelligence and language. Watch this video, read your module, ask me questions, and good luck.